you've screwed up. Like, you made a poor decision. Maybe you even made a poor decision because you didn't pay enough attention to some aspect of what you were doing and you screwed up. There are several bad things you can do that everybody immediately would point out, like, that's not right. So blaming other people randomly, sort of scapegoating, all that kind of horrible behavior diminishes trust. People are like, well, I don't trust this guy. Like, he screwed up. He won't own it. He won't take responsibility. The other option is to say, like, yeah, this was a bad decision. Like, we tried this. It was a mistake. I should have recognized X, Y, and Z factors that I didn't pay enough attention to. I'm sorry. Now let's try and make things better. Let's figure out what's our path forward. People really respond to that. They really get it because everybody's made a mistake in their lives. That one would be, be transparent, especially when you have something to hide.
Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where leadership meets real-world insights. In each episode, you can eavesdrop on exclusive conversations with top thought leaders, best-selling authors, and experts in leadership, communication, relationships, culture, and everything else that shapes your effectiveness in the workplace and in your personal life. Leadership is here for you. Now, here's our host, himself a seasoned coach and best-selling author, Dr. Roger Dean Duncan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership, the podcast where we explore the mindset, skills, and strategies that leaders need to grow influence that truly matters. Think about this question. What does it take to build something that lasts? In this episode, I sit down with Jimmy Wales, visionary founder of Wikipedia and author of The 7 Rules of Trust, a blueprint for building things that last. For context, consider this. In a single month, just the English version of Wikipedia has roughly 11 billion page views, or about 130 billion per year. And there are more than 300 Wikipedias in languages other than English, each one written and edited independently. From revolutionizing global knowledge sharing to rethinking how trust fuels innovation, Jimmy Wales brings a blend of technical insight and human-centered leadership. In this conversation, we'll explore the origins of Wikipedia, the challenges of maintaining neutrality and accuracy in a decentralized platform, and the deeper principles behind Jimmy's new book. Whether you're leading a team, building a brand, or navigating today's trust-deficient landscape, this conversation offers a blueprint for resilience, transparency, and long-term impact. Jimmy Wales, welcome to Leadership.
Great. Thanks for having me on. Good to be here.
Let's start with this. When Wikipedia was first created, what problem were you trying to solve?
Well, at that time, this was late 90s, early 2000s, the internet was very exciting. There was a lot of stuff going on. But what I felt was missing was an encyclopedia, a free encyclopedia. It sounded like a really cool, fun thing to have online. And I had been watching the growth of free software, open source software, and seeing programmers coming together to collaborate in new ways. And I realized that that kind of collaboration could extend beyond just software into all kinds of things. And so I, got started with the previous project, Newpedia, which wasn't very successful. In fact, it was very unsuccessful. And, sort of started in to say, okay, like, how would we do this? How can we make an encyclopedia with volunteers?
So how did you decide on the name Wikipedia?
Well, we had a project called Newpedia. That was the predecessor. And it was like new for new encyclopedia. That was a very simple name that didn't come from anywhere, really. And then Wiki. So Wiki is a type of software. So Wiki just means a website anyone can edit. And there were wikis that existed before Wikipedia. And it's from a Hawaiian word, wiki, meaning quick. So quick collaboration. If you go to Maui, the bus at the airport is called the Wiki bus. I'm not sure it's actually very quick, but that's what they call it. And so the idea was to use this Wiki software concept to work on the encyclopedia, because the progress at Newpedia was very, very slow, because there was a 7-stage review process to get anything published, and it was all very onerous and difficult. And I just thought, why don't we just try a much simpler system? But we were afraid that the community members who existed for Newpedia, which were a lot of very serious professors, would hate the idea. We didn't want to offend them. So we said, well, let's just start it as a separate project, a separate scratch pad that could feed into Nupedia. But it turned out it actually worked very well. And it was popular even with those academics. Once they used it, they thought, oh, yeah, this is actually pretty good.
Well, academics are often not known for their speed.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what was the biggest early mistake that shaped how Wikipedia evolved?
The very earliest mistake was the assumption that you needed this rigorous top-down process of control. We had this 7-stage review process, which just recently somebody pointed out to me. I hadn't made this parallel myself. They said, so the first one was the 7 rules of mistrust. I was like, that's exactly right.
Right.
The very feel of the system was, okay, we don't trust you. You've got to fax in your CV to prove you're qualified. And we're going to have everybody, check everything and assume the worst and so forth. So there was that. And then, along the way, there were things that in some ways they might have been mistakes, but in other ways, I realized there wasn't much we could have done. We were learning and we were doing the best we could in the very, very earliest times, because I just downloaded this UseMod wiki was the name of it. It was just like a single, a few hundred line script that was a wiki. And I installed that on my server. And it was so open. You could create a username, but there were no passwords. So if I created a username to be Jimbo, anybody else could log in and be Jimbo. So that was obviously not a real system, right? That was never going to work. So one of the first things I did was create a password system to say, no, actually, accounts will be unique, because that was obvious. But nothing bad actually happened even with that, because at that very early stage, the first few weeks, it was just a handful of us who were even aware of the site, sort of some of this small community. Then, over the years, there were things that happened where we realized there was the very famous John Siegenthaler event where this journalist stumbled across the entry about himself, and it said that he had been briefly suspected of being involved in the Kennedy assassination. Didn't say he did anything. He just said he had been briefly. This was completely false. In fact, he was a family friend of the Kennedys. And so He was not happy about this, and obviously not. So he rang me up and, had it down within 10 minutes of the phone call. But that was when we said, okay, hold on. We're getting to be popular now. This was many years ago. And actually that responsibility, particularly around living people, is huge, right? If you say something negative about someone, you really better have a source, a good source. So we came up with the BLP policy, we call it Biography of Living Persons, that says if you say something negative about someone, you must have a source. And if somebody sees something that doesn't have a source and it's negative, you should take it out. There was a habit at the time of, you see something negative about someone and you're like, oh, there doesn't seem to be a source. So you go on the discussion page and say, hey, I didn't see a source. It says he murdered somebody, but, is there a source?
Yeah, that's pretty negative. Yeah.
Let's take it down first and then talk about it, right? If it's a negative thing about a living person, that's really important. So there's a lot of things like that, we sort of grew into over time that became necessary as we became more popular.
So tell us, from day one, how did you decide to trust volunteers with an open editing process?
So there were a few things involved. And I should say right off the bat, I didn't know for sure, was this going to work? And I did wake up a lot in the middle of the night, just go check the site, make sure nobody was trashing things. But, I found out pretty quickly, oh, yeah, there's this guy in Australia. He's always on when I'm asleep. So he'll look after things and all that. But I think a part of it came about because what I had seen online, the internet was much smaller then, but this is still true today. Like if, let's say you're interested in some subject and you're a little confused about something, and you email a professor at a major university and you just say, hey, I was reading some of your work. I didn't really understand. I got this question. And they'll answer you. Like even today, they'll answer you, any random person, as long as you write a kind and thoughtful email and you clearly have done your homework and you're not just pestering them to help with your homework or whatever.
Right.
And that, people are actually basically nice. And then, I think a part of it, I grew up in the South, which has its problems and this and that, but people are generally very nice. And I always had this sort of idea from my life that most people are pretty decent. And, there's always a few knuckleheads, but broadly, people are generally trustworthy. And, but part of it was really learning over time, like, oh, okay, like actually, when we look even today, you look at edits from people who aren't logged in. So completely anonymous. They just come and they make a change, just using their IP address. And those edits aren't as good as the edits of experienced Wikipedians who've been doing this for years and so on and so forth. But on net, they're positive. Like they're doing more good than harm. And, we all understand this about trust. I mean, it's easy to get a very dark view of human nature if you spend too much time on social media or too much time listening to politicians of the current era. But, when you think about day-to-day life, you go into a restaurant, you sit there right next to people with steak knives, and you don't think, oh, gosh, they're probably going to stab me. You just think nothing of it. You're like, yeah, you can trust people to sit next to you. And that doesn't mean it's perfect. Sometimes people do go crazy and start stabbing people with steak knives in restaurants. But, when that happens, we deal with it. We don't design society around the worst people. We design society to build trust and to confirm trust and give people a bit of permission and freedom to be creative on the expectation that they're going to do something good with that.
Sure. Assume the best.
Assume the best. The way we put it in Wikipedia is assume good faith, which basically means, look, if you see somebody doing something wrong in Wikipedia, whatever it might be, they put in something and they didn't cite a source, or they just wrote bad grammar or whatever. If you start by assuming, okay, this person's a complete and total troll, a horrible human being, we need to block them immediately and reject them, you're going to miss a lot, because that actually probably isn't true. Probably most people, they're trying to do something useful. So like one of the things I love that we do, and we're a little uneven in how we do this, but broadly it's still true, is if you go to Wikipedia and you make a silly vandalistic edit, hopefully the first warning you get will be very friendly and say something like, oh, thank you for your experiment. Yes, you can edit Wikipedia.
Right.
But however, maybe try and do something a little more constructive next time. And then, of course, if you keep it up, you'll get blocked and all of that. And that really works. And it sort of is how I think, unless we've had a really tough life. And obviously there are people who've had a lot of damage in childhood and they find it really hard to trust people. Of course, that's the thing. But for a lot of people, most people, you sort of know this. You're like, okay, you meet somebody new and you assume good faith. You assume they're not there to scam you or whatever. I mean, it depends on the context, but broadly we would say, yeah, actually most people are pretty decent. Some of them are annoying, but the number of people who are actively maliciously horrible is pretty low. So it isn't just sort of like a saintly thing to do or something like that. It's just practical. It's just that, like, actually most people are pretty nice. And if you treat them well, they're going to treat you well. That actually works really well. It's how we live.
Yes. So how do conflicts within the editor community typically get resolved?
So, hopefully they just get resolved by, if people of good faith come together and they realize, okay, we need to find a compromise. We're not all going to get what we want, but let's work together in good spirits and try and do it. If it gets intractable, different things can happen. Sometimes people get upset and get angry. That's just human. But I think it's important that in our culture, in our community culture, we have a culture that says, look, you're going to fly off the handle sooner or later. If you do, you should apologize, right? You should make up for it. So we try to keep a good, healthy spirit. Then if there's, very difficult, intractable disputes, then if somebody's just being completely unreasonable, they're likely to get blocked by the admins who are elected by the community, accountable to the community. In some cases where it goes on, sort of a big kind of conflict that goes on for a long period of time, then we have the arbitration committee, which is elected from the community. They try to impose binding solutions in various ways. Oftentimes it'll be a cooling off period. Sometimes it's edit restrictions on certain people to say, like, look, this group of people and this group of people, you're all just fighting endlessly. You're not making any progress. Everybody out of the water. We're going to invite other Wikipedians who aren't so emotionally invested to come in and have a go at working on this. None of it is a magical utopia. There's always things that I think could be better. There's always things that, we get wrong and so on. But broadly, it's done pretty well.
I don't know why my mind's going this way, because I have a very strong marriage. But it seems to me that some of the principles you're talking about could be helpful to people in a marriage situation.
For sure. Yeah.
Just listen to each other. Stop talking and start listening.
Absolutely. And again, that is sort of like assume good faith. And in a lot of one-to-one personal situations of conflict, a marriage is a good example where this can arise. It's easy to forget that assume good faith to say like, okay, actually, my partner is on my case about such and such, and it's really driving me crazy. And you can stop and say, okay, but what is it they're really trying to accomplish? What is it that I could help to make it better? And sometimes it's hopeless. Sometimes it just doesn't work out. But in many cases, there are ways you can step back and go, yeah, you know what? Actually, we can find a good compromise. I understand, where they're coming from, and there is something I should change. Maybe there's something they could change too, and then we'll actually find a better place. There's no magic answers to these things, but I do think trust is really important. That basic fundamental trust of, I trust that you're a decent person. I trust that we're going to try and figure this out together.
Well, I frequently say that trust is the operating system of every relationship.
Absolutely. And every society. I mean, one of the things that we do talk about in the book is, in fact, I wanted to put more in the book, but I could go on for too long and it'd be boring. But, when you look at different cultures and different societies around the world, you do see high trust and low trust cultures. And high trust cultures just do tend to be a lot more prosperous. You can get business done a lot better. If you go into any kind of business deal and your default assumption is that the other side's trying to scam you, then you've got to build in all these layers of checks and protections, and you've got to spend forever dealing with things. We've all experienced this. Like, if you need a handyman to come and do something in your home, if you've got somebody good, you're going to stick with them because it's an area where you just feel like the chances of somebody sort of being a scammer, being not very good at it, and so on, are kind of high. And you really want that trust relationship. You want to say, hey, I need to get this done. You're going to give me a fair price. It drives me crazy if I get 3 quotes for the same job. I had this once here in the UK. One was like £5,000 to fix a leak on my roof. Another one, the guy came out and he's like, I see a couple of loose tiles up there. I'll get my guy to come around, and, for £100, he came and climbed up on the roof and moved the tiles and tacked them down. And that was it. It was finished. And I was like, I will use that guy again and again and again.
Which guy are you going to call next time?
Yeah. Exactly. And it's sort of like, you come out and you see the house and you think, oh, I'm just going to ask for the big price. This guy obviously knows nothing about roofs, and that's for sure. You want to have that kind of culture. And by the way, I always say this, like in business, when we, even at the level of very big business, people are willing, broadly, not everybody, but people are willing to forgive a company that screws up. As long as they own it, they come clean. They say, like, we put out this product and you know what? It wasn't good enough. We're going to do the right thing. We're going to do a recall. We're going to fix it. We're going to refund your money. And if you do that, then the customers will go, oh, all right, well, you know what? I forgive you. Like, this product did suck, but you're making it right in the end. I'm not going to disqualify you and never do business with you again. I'm just going to say, okay, right. Yeah, fine. We all have these problems. That's hugely important, because otherwise, if you've lost the trust of the public, of your customers, your partners, and so on, everything gets more expensive. That's for sure.
So, Jimmy, how do you see artificial intelligence impacting Wikipedia's future?
Obviously, it's the big thing that's on everybody's mind these days. And I'm happy about that, because I was sick of blockchain being on everybody's minds all the time. I was so tired of that. So with Wikipedia, there's a few different elements to this. So first of all, the thing to establish is, like, large language models are not good enough yet to write Wikipedia entries. Will they be in 25 years? I don't know. Maybe so. But for now, they hallucinate, they make stuff up. And actually, the most dangerous thing is they tend to make things up that are plausible, because the way the technology works, having digested a huge body of, has read everything in the world ever written, and it just predicts what's a most likely next thing that you might say had you said all this before. And it can go down a weird path, and then it suddenly is just babbling nonsense. But it's not crazy nonsense. It's plausible nonsense. One of my favorite things, I always ask every new model that I test, who is Kate Garvey, my wife? Because she's not a famous person, but she's known to some extent. And she's kind of in that perfect spot where the AI thinks it knows who she is. So it starts talking, and then it just starts making stuff up. And that means, like, there's no way you could use this to write Wikipedia entries. Yet, it can do a lot of really interesting things that you couldn't do just a few years ago. So, for example, I've been using it just, sort of for my day-to-day work to say, oh, I want to compare this article in English, French, and Spanish. just to see how they differ. And it's super interesting because machine translation's gotten really good, but also I don't have to read all three of these articles. It can just sort of summarize, like, here's the major differences and so on. It's actually pretty good at that. And it may make some mistakes sometimes, but it's generally okay. And that's very useful and very productive. And so for our editing community, we think there are ways that people can use it effectively. One example is feed in a short Wikipedia entry and all the sources and say, what's in the Wikipedia entry that's not supported by the sources, or what's in the sources that isn't yet in Wikipedia but should be. And I found with some very simple tests, it's actually pretty good at that. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And I think with some refinement, it could be very useful. But what we believe is it should always be a human making that final decision. Like, make a suggestion, that's fine. You can go through huge amounts of text very, very quickly, but you make a lot of mistakes. So we're going to double check before we do anything.
Sure. The key seems to be to partner with AI rather than turn things over to AI and just take it for face value.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what you've said about something can be plausible, but totally wrong.
Yeah. Well, this is why one of my hobbies, I love to cook. I'm pretty good and take some pride in that. I enjoy it. And I use AI to ask about recipes and things like this. But I always do warn people, you probably should be really careful about doing this unless you already know how to cook. Because if you do, and it suggests triple the salt, you will go, hold on, that, 5 tablespoons of salt, that seems quite high.
Right.
Whereas if you're new to cooking, you might go, I don't know, it's an AI, I'm sure it knows what it's talking about, and you're going to have a terrible dinner then, So
you should have your guests sign a waiver.
yeah, exactly.
Just in case.
Yeah. Just in case. Yeah. Sorry. The recipes tonight were created by AI. So I'm out of here.
Right.
I'm abandoning all responsibility. No. And it's an exciting time. And obviously one of the other things is we're going to see a huge amount of change to how people are accessing information. What does that mean for Wikipedia? If people are getting their answers directly from an AI summary at the top of a search engine rather than coming to Wikipedia, how will that impact us? We're not sure yet. I find our traffic has declined a little bit for humans, but there's a lot of reasons that might be. So we're not sure, that's probably partly AI related, but maybe not. And it's very different for Wikipedia from some other types of websites. So, for example, there's a classic great programming website called Stack Overflow. And I've seen news reports that their traffic is 10% of what it was just a few years ago. Because it used to be, if you're a programmer, and particularly if you're like me, a not very good programmer, you get an error message. And because I don't do it professionally, I love programming and making things. And just for fun, I'm noodling around with stuff. And you Google the error message, and then you find somebody else on Stack Overflow says, hey, I got this error message, and somebody will answer them. And you're like, okay, that's going to solve my problem. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Sometimes you get into a long discussion. Sometimes you see an answer that actually didn't make sense and so on. But ChatGPT and Gemini, they're very good at programming. So now I can Google the error message and say, can you help me with this? And it tends to do, it's a really good product for that. And so that is a strong competition for Stack Overflow. Of course, one of the problems we have with AI right now is it's so unbelievably sycophantic. It always says, well, that's a brilliant question. I'm like, no, I know enough to know that's a dumb question. Like, I don't have any shame about having a dumb question. So you don't have to tell me how smart I am. It's just like, I clearly have no idea what I'm doing here. And you sort of flattering me isn't actually going to help me at all. So, and I think I'm not alone. A lot of people complain about that it's so sycophantic,
Your change initiative has the budget. The strategy looks solid, and everyone's nodding along in the meetings. But for some reason, it's going nowhere. Dr. Roger Dean Duncan knows why. After 40 years in the trenches with top business leaders, he knows that change fails when organizations lack the right foundations: trust, accountability, and real communication. Dr. Duncan's free 10-minute assessment shows you exactly where your organization stands. Answer a few straightforward questions that reveal your true change readiness level. Don't waste months discovering the hard way. Get your free assessment today at leadershop.net/change. Again, that's leadershop.net/change.
So let's talk about your book. In writing your book, why did you choose rules rather than principles or values?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. And unfortunately, I don't have a super brilliant answer. We absolutely did toy around with it. Partly it's just like what sounded good, what had rhythm of, why is it 7? I can't say we started with a grand theory of trust and there was only one answer, 7. And when you read the book, there's actually kind of a hidden 8th rule, which basically says you have to actually do all the 7 things. They're not just things to say,
Right.
At one point I had like 11. And my agent, my publisher, they're like, that sounds like people are going to just go like, that's too much to read. That's 11 sounds like a lot. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I was already thinking these two can be combined. So, whatever. It just sounded nice. And then rules versus principles versus values, I think is actually a very, very good question because we wrote them as rules, but they're all values based in a certain sense, Transparency is a value. It's also a rule, be transparent and all that. Yeah, no particular reason. I just thought it sounded nice.
It makes sense to me. If you would, give us a quick Cliff Notes review of the 7 rules.
Yeah, well, the thing is, I've deliberately not memorized them in order. I always joke, well, people have to buy the book, but we can go through a few of them. The ones that I'm sort of most passionate about, I would say, would be the 2, make it personal and create a clear purpose. So make it personal basically is just making the point that trust is lost one-on-one. Like trust is something that's in an individual human mind. You either trust something or you don't, and you trust it for a certain reason or a certain purpose, And I think if you're in business and you're thinking about this, this is really important to think back to that individual customer, that individual employee, that individual partner, and how they feel and how they're thinking, how they're experiencing what it is that you're doing. In order to build trust, you have to think in that way, because if what you do instead, and this is very common and popular in Silicon Valley, and it's a big mistake, I think, a lot of .com companies, they use A/B testing. So they'll run 2 different variants of something on the website and test how it performs. Nothing wrong with that. I'm not against A/B testing. But what that can lead you to is a very, very dark pattern that actually undermines trust. One of my pet peeves is canceling a subscription, say to a newspaper or something like this. And, it's actually quite easy for them to implement a proper way of canceling a subscription, but too many, they send you in circles. They make it really hard. Hard. And it's super annoying. And I guarantee you that came from A/B testing that said when people start down the path, if we do it this way, then only 20% of them cancel. If we do it this way, 60% end up canceling. So we better do the 20% way. But if that 20% way convinces that customer, even the ones who give up and don't cancel yet, convinces that you're basically not a proper person, like you're scamming them, like this is abusive and all that, you're causing much deeper long-term damage to your brand, to your business. It's perfectly fine.
They're going to talk about it.
Yeah, they're going to talk about it. They're going to say, oh, God, yeah, don't sign up for that. It takes forever to get out of it. And it's fine to say, like, okay, I go to leave and you say, well, hold on, let's give you a couple reasons. And then you go, no, thanks, I am going to leave. Okay, that's enough. That's fine. But then you send me around and you go there and you have to do this and that and the other. And then you're pretty soon you're like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. It's terrible. So that's a failure to make it personal. That's looking at some numbers and not remembering to say, what would I feel like if I went through this process? How would I talk to my friends about it? What will it do to our broader reputation? And if you're some small scammy thing off the side, maybe you don't care. But if you're a serious business, you really better care about your broad reputation and whether people think you're trustworthy and good or not, because it makes a huge difference in the long run. Another one is create a clear purpose. So there, Wikipedia, for example, we all know what it is we're here for. So if we were vague about what is an encyclopedia, we're vague about what we're trying to accomplish, we're just some sort of giant message board or something, it'd be really hard to make decisions. It'd be really hard to build trust. It'd be really hard to say what counts as success, what counts as failure, how are we going to evaluate how we're doing as a community and so forth. And so that having a simple and clear, straightforward purpose that everybody can understand is hugely important. And that's true. We see it in a lot of businesses. We do talk about it, not usually in the context of trust, but sometimes businesses get too big, too scattered. They've got 20 different projects that don't seem to fit together in any particular way. Sometimes a big conglomerate like that can succeed, but more often somebody starts to eat their lunch because they've taken their eye off the ball. The employees are like, we're not even sure what is our main goal here? What are we trying to accomplish? And one of the reasons is then you start to have crisis of trust. Like, I don't really trust that this company is going to do what I think because they've got so many different objectives and so forth. Whereas, keep it simple, keep it clear. I've always liked, a business like Netflix. It's pretty straightforward, right? I know exactly what it is they're trying to do. They go out and they license the shows. They charge you a monthly fee. You watch the shows. Like, that's a simple business. It's easy to trust. You can kind of predict what Netflix is going to do. And internally, they all know what they're doing as well. So I think that's one of the things that is very, very helpful.
So even the best of leaders will make a mistake from time to time. To preserve trust, how should leaders handle mistakes?
Yeah, so that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah. So, there's a few of the rules that I would go for, be civil. I mean, some of this is so basic that we already know it. Even so, it's worth repeating. It's worth repeating to say.
Will Rogers famously said, common sense ain't all that common.
Exactly. So, so whatever, you've screwed up. Like, you made a poor decision. Maybe you even made a poor decision because you didn't pay enough attention to some aspect of what you were doing and you screwed up. And, there are several bad things you can do that everybody immediately would point out, like, that's not right. So blaming other people randomly, sort of scapegoating, all that kind of horrible behavior diminishes trust. People are like, well, I don't trust this guy. Like, he screwed up. He won't own it. He won't take responsibility. The other option is to say, like, this was a bad decision. Like, we tried this. It was a mistake. I should have recognized X, Y, and Z factors that I didn't pay enough attention to. I'm sorry. Now let's try and make things better. Let's figure out what's our path forward. People really respond to that. They really get it because everybody's made a mistake in their lives. Everybody, realizes this. A good example would be a business to business example where you've got a contract with a partner and you're supposed to deliver something on a certain date. And you realize a month before, like, we might not make this deadline, right? So you've got a choice of what to do. You can cover up. You can scramble. You can try to deliver a shoddy product that isn't good enough. Or one of the things you probably should do if you're a good leader is to say, you know what, we got to go talk to them. We got to go say, like, here's the problems we ran into. These ones we screwed up on. These ones we didn't anticipate. There's actually a bigger issue that we should all work on together. We're going to be a little late here. We're going to ask for your forbearance and your support and help. We're going to make it right. We're going to do what we need to do. And wow, like, that is so rare. It shouldn't be rare, but it's so rare that people will say, like, oh, well, these people are fantastic. Like, it was great. Yep. They missed a deadline. Don't really care about that. The deadline was a deadline, right? And far worse to say, yeah, they met the deadline. 2 weeks later, we found out it was shoddy work. And basically the whole project is a bust. Like, that's far, far worse. So, a lot of these things, that one would be, be transparent. Be transparent, especially when you have something to hide, which is great. It's sort of, and it also illustrates why it's worth pondering because everybody's like, oh, yeah, let's be transparent. Well, that's easy when things are going smooth. It's like, you know what? I was totally transparent and honest with you. We actually did better work than we thought we would, and we got it done 2 days early. Okay, that's easy. Right. That's transparent. Yeah. It's harder to be transparent when you're like, actually, wow, like, we got this one wrong, so we need to own up to it and all that. And the reason you do is that it's all about thinking long-term versus short-term. It's all about thinking, you know what, we want to be here. We want to build things that last. We want to be the kind of organization or the kind of politician, whatever it is that people can count on in the long run.
You're making me think of one of our best friends who was the builder who was in charge of constructing our large family home nearly 30 years ago. And he had that kind of relationship with all of his subcontractors and with us. And I don't know of a lot of people who can say that one of their best friends is the builder who built their house 30 years ago.
Yeah. And is still their friend.
Still our friend, yes.
Yeah.
So, Jimmy, in today's digital world, what's the biggest threat to trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few. Like, one of the things that I think is foremost on my mind is that a lot of the algorithms of social media help to push forward a very divisive sort of culture online. And, if you want to be successful in some narrow sense on social media, basically a great way to do it is by attacking other people, assuming bad faith, not really being prepared to compromise or to listen or to anything else. And that's just toxic. I think it's unhealthy for us as individuals. I think if you spend too much time, and I know I've been there, you sort of start to get a really dark feeling and you're like, gosh, if you just went onto Twitter or X and you post, I mean, literally you can post almost anything and somebody's going to yell at you. And if you do it too much, you think, you know what, people are horrible. Like out there, the general public, they're just screaming lunatics. But what you don't really recognize is the algorithm's actually pushing that content to you because it keeps you engaged for longer.
Right.
And I think a lot of those platforms are beginning to realize, you know what, actually, this might not be the best strategy for the long run. I know some really good people at Google, and I think they are getting this right around YouTube, for example. So YouTube, it's like any platform. There's an algorithm to decide, like, you finish watching a video and it's going to recommend a few more things to you. And they have to watch it like a hawk, because if they just say to the algorithm, keep people on the site for as long as possible, it's very likely that the algorithm is going to start promoting really toxic content because people are like, hold on, what is this? And you stare at it for a little longer and you stay a little longer. And they realize, like, actually, if that's going to make people hate YouTube, because every time I go there, I end up seeing crazy, angry stuff. Even though I stay a little longer that time, maybe I come back less in the future. And so they have to grapple with that to say, like, okay, yeah, of course, if you're building an algorithm, you want the site to be popular. You want to show people content that they're interested in. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you're not really careful, you're going to appeal to that, sort of very short term. It's sort of like if I said to you, what do you want to do this afternoon? And would you say, I want to slow down and look at a traffic accident and see if I can see any dead bodies, No,
boy.
Nobody wants to do that, but we're human beings. So you pass by and you can't help but have a look, And so, like, why put yourself in a situation where it's like, oh, we're going to show you stuff that you think is actually not healthy and not good for you because we know you're going to stare at it for a bit. No, thank you. I'm not interested. And, a lot of that, it's a balance. And we see a lot of the problems in society. I mean, the concern I have with the loss of trust and the decline of trust and the rise of the rancor is, we see it. We just recently had the longest ever government shutdown. In part, no small part, because neither side trusts each other enough to go like, you know what, we're going to give you this one, but you're going to owe us one in the future, right? They just think, no, I'll give them this one and they're going to screw me over in the future,
Yeah.
And let's do this. You care more about this. I care more about that. Let's make a compromise. Like that stuff is really hard to do if you don't have some basic human decency and trust. And and then also then it plays out in, I've been watching, I guess we all have, this sort of the ICE and the killings and all of this. And, you see these horrible situations where I'm super sympathetic to both sides in a sense. I'm like, okay, I understand these protesters are upset. I understand these cops are scared. These moments get out of control. Somebody gets killed. It's terrible. In some cases, I think this person needs to be in jail. I think that, but I also think, wow, like what a culture we've come to if it's come to this, right? That it's horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible all around.
Well, in terms of news media, depending on which media you're looking at, it's echo chambers, echo chambers.
I'll give you my favorite example. I live in London. I live in the UK, have done for many years. And I have an electric car, not a Tesla. I have an electric car. And I love electric cars. I'm actually really excited about the electric transitions. I'm impressed with how fast electric cars are and the battery life is good. And all of these things are really great and exciting. I like tech, so it's a tech innovation I like. So the two papers here, there are more than two. There's lots of papers here, but they're very simple. There's The Guardian, which is center left, I would say, and there's The Telegraph, center right. And if you just cut out the headlines for the last week about electric cars and just show me the headlines, I bet you I can pick 90% accurate which paper it's from, because The Telegraph hates electric cars and The Guardian loves electric cars. And it actually causes me to trust both papers less. Because even though I love electric cars, I don't only want to hear the good things. So like one of the examples is, here's a fact about electric cars. They're heavier. So the tires wear down faster. When tires are wearing down, the little particles of rubber are in the air, and that's more air pollution. Okay, how serious is that problem? How big is it? Does it matter? Does it not matter? I'm very curious, and I don't mind if it turns out, yeah, actually, that's a huge downside of electric cars. I need to know that. Like, that's important. I don't mind. It's not going to cause a crisis in my universe to know that. And yet, you'll see a headline and the Guardian will poo-poo it and the Telegraph will act like it's the end of the world. And I'm like, I don't trust either of you. I don't feel like I'm getting objective news. And I have to sort of read both to be able to kind of triangulate. And I think that's unfortunate. I think the media, and, broadly speaking, I do think, like the financial press has been better about this. And one of the reasons I think is that, if you're reading, we'll just take the Wall Street Journal as our example to not be too local here, but you're reading something for a business purpose and you need to make a decision. You actually need to make a decision that's serious and based on facts. And therefore, you're not just reading this for a feel-good thing that agrees with you or something. You're reading it because you need to know. And I think that's true of everybody, by the way. General interest newspapers, people read because they need to know and they want to know about the world. And when they pander too much to one side or the other and they become more partisan, it reduces trust for all of us and nobody knows what's true anymore. And one of the journalists who I interview in the book, Christiane Amanpour, she's been a serious journalist for many years. She's one of the people who's respected by all sides as, she's a serious, proper journalist.
Right.
And one of the things she talks about is we have to have some kind of shared facts and understanding. And then what you do with those facts, that's the policy debate. That's where you debate. But if we don't even have the same basic understanding of facts, then policy debates become completely a nightmare, completely hopeless. So, okay, here's a problem in the world. Illegal immigration, right? Let's say you and I are having a debate about illegal immigration into the U.S., and you think it's about 600 people a year come to the U.S. illegally, and I think, no, it's about 60 million. Well, we're both way, way off. Like, neither of us has it right at all. And so it's a silly example in a way, but if that's our belief about the size of the problem, then we're going to have a completely different view of what needs to be done about it.
Sure.
You're going to say, well, nothing, really, 600 people, like it's a nothing. And I'm like 60 million, basically, we better get our guns, right? Like it's a mass invasion. And then in the middle, maybe we still don't agree about policy, but at least then we go like, okay, actually, there's this many. Here's the reasons different ones are here. Here's the way they got here. Here's what's going on. Then we can go, okay, like let's find some solutions that we can both agree on to say, well, actually, that's the biggest problem. We could deal with that. It doesn't, nothing magically comes out of it. It's not, sort of la, 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 we're all happy now. But we at least have a chance. We have a chance of thinking through the issues and coming to some compromises and actually muddling through in the way that democracy always has. So anyway, but we have to trust each other and we have to have trust in some information that we get.
I'm concerned about the upcoming generations because they have very few role models of people who can disagree without being disagreeable.
Yeah.
We see virtually nothing in the media except people who are, frankly, on both sides, pretty hateful toward the other side.
Yeah. It's problem. I mean, I'm hopeful that we're just going through a spasm or a phase, and I do think, I always say, if you go back, I was really pleased and proud when it was Obama versus McCain, on the basis that I thought both of them were serious, proper people. I have agreements or disagreements with either of them on policy issues. Neither of them was disrespectful to the other. They were both sort of thoughtful, kind. And I was like, yeah, you know what? This I can deal with. Like, whatever happens, whoever gets elected, that's fine. Like, we're going to be okay. And that's still largely true. I think we're going to be okay. But I do think we've lost a bit of that sort of decency and civility. I like your expression. The ability to disagree without being disagreeable, I think is massively important in politics. And for many, many years, it's been the case, like the TV pundits, many of them are in the bad camp on this one, whatever you think of whatever argument they're making, it's like, yeah, you didn't really have to sort of slash and burn everybody, but to kind of at least acknowledge that the other side, there's a problem they're trying to solve, or they're basically human beings and so on.
Sure. We can learn from virtually anybody if we'll just listen rather than keep talking.
Mm-hmm.
As my grandparents used to say, you don't learn a lot while you're talking.
That's right. Yeah. It's very good.
Well, Jimmy, what final thought would you like to leave regarding trust in today's marketplace of ideas?
Well, I think there's a lot of demand for it. And so I think particularly for those young people we were just talking about, if you can go into your first job or your first workplace, and after 6 months, if people say, you know what, you can count on Roger. Like Roger, he doesn't always get it right. He's young, he's inexperienced. He always, like I trust him. Then you've made a huge step forward, a huge step forward. And that is something like really, really worth thinking about how to build in your colleagues and all that. So that's my thought.
Be willing to learn.
Be willing to learn.
Well, Jimmy Wales, thank you so much for joining us on Leadership. As Jimmy reminds us, trust isn't just a virtue, it's infrastructure. The systems we build reflect the values we embed. Wikipedia's success wasn't inevitable. It was engineered through openness, accountability, and a radical commitment to shared truth. In an era of misinformation and fractured institutions, leaders must design for trust, not just hope for it. Whether you're scaling a startup or stewarding a community, the rules of trust are more than ideals, they are operational strategies. So ask yourself, what are you building? How are you building it? And will it last? Jimmy's book is The 7 Rules of Trust, a blueprint for building things that last. Trust me, it's highly readable, and you can put it to good use immediately. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with your team, your network, or anyone else who's ready to lead with more confidence, more courage, and more impact. And be sure to leave a review of our podcast. Even a single sentence fuels the algorithms that promote the great content that the Leadership podcast provides. And for free resources to help you in your leadership journey, go to leadership.net. That's leadership.net. Thanks again for joining us. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and spread good cheer wherever you go. For Leadership, I'm Roger Dean Duncan.